Thursday, November 2nd. I moved into the apartment 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks and 2 days to be precise, though I'm not entirely sure why I'm counting. Maybe because counting gives me something to do at night when I can't sleep, when the walls feel too thin and the silence too thick, and I find myself staring out my window at the building across the alley, at apartment 4B, at him. The estate agent told me the neighborhood was quiet, professional types, she said, gesturing vaguely at the brick buildings lining the street, people who keep to themselves. She made it sound appealing, like a virtue. I needed quiet. I needed to keep to myself. The last 6 months had been, well, they'd been difficult. So I signed the lease without asking too many questions. I didn't ask about the water pressure, or the heating, or whether the previous tenant had left because of the rats I occasionally hear scratching in the walls. I just wanted a place that wasn't there, wasn't saturated with memories of everything I'd lost. The apartment came furnished, mostly. A sagging sofa, a bed that squeaks if you breathe wrong, a kitchen table with one wobbly leg. But the windows are large, and there's good light in the mornings, and I told myself that would be enough, that I could make it enough. I noticed him the first night. I'd been unpacking, or rather, I'd been sitting on the floor surrounded by boxes I had no energy to open, when I stood up to stretch and looked out the window. The buildings are close here, close enough that you can see straight into the apartments across the way if people don't draw their curtains. Most do, of course. Most people value their privacy. But not the man in 4B. His curtains were open, wide open, and he was standing in the middle of his living room, facing the far wall, completely still, just standing there. At first, I thought he might be watching TV, but I couldn't see a screen. The room was dim, lit only by what looked like a single lamp somewhere off to the side, casting long shadows. I watched him for a moment, longer than I should have, probably, before I shook myself and looked away. It was none of my business. People could stand in their own apartments if they wanted to. Maybe he was meditating. Maybe he was having an argument with someone I couldn't see. Maybe he was just weird. I pulled my own curtains shut and tried to forget about it. But here's the thing about insomnia. It makes you notice things you wouldn't otherwise notice. It makes you a witness to the strange, small hours when most people are asleep and the world takes on a different texture. And over the next few nights, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I kept thinking about the man across the way, about how still he'd been, about his open curtains. The second night, I looked again. I told myself I wouldn't, but I did. 2:17 a.m. I remember because I'd been watching the clock, counting down the hours until dawn. I got up, padded to the window in my bare feet, and there he was again. Same position, same wall, same perfect, eerie stillness. He didn't move. Not once in the 15 minutes I stood there watching. Most people shift their weight, scratch their nose, check their phone, but he just stood there like a statue, like he'd been frozen mid-step and forgotten how to start again. I convinced myself there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe he was one of those people who did Tai Chi at odd hours. Maybe he was sleepwalking. Maybe... The third night, I brought the binoculars.
I found them in one of the boxes left over from a camping trip Jake and I took 2 years ago, back when we still took trips, back before everything fell apart. I'd almost thrown them out 6 times, but for some reason I'd kept packing them from place to place, and that night, standing at my window at 2:43 a.m., I was glad I had. I raised them to my eyes and adjusted the focus.
The man came into sharp relief. He was youngish, 30s, maybe early 40s. Dark hair, average build, wearing what looked like a white t-shirt and jeans. His face was turned toward the wall, so I couldn't see his features clearly. But there was something about his posture that seemed wrong, too rigid, too focused. And then I saw what he was doing. He was writing on the wall. I watched as he raised his right hand, slowly, deliberately, and traced something with his finger. No, not his finger. He was holding something. A marker, maybe, or a pen. The movements were precise, careful. He'd write for a few seconds, then step back slightly, then move forward and write again. Numbers. He was writing numbers. My heart was hammering now, though I couldn't have said why. There was nothing inherently sinister about writing on your own wall. Maybe he was doing math. Maybe he was working out some problem, something that required a big surface to think. But why at 3 in the morning, and why standing so still between each number, like he was waiting for something? I watched for nearly an hour before I finally forced myself back to bed. I didn't sleep. I kept seeing him in my mind, that slow, deliberate hand moving across the wall, writing numbers in the dark.
Friday, November 3rd. I thought about going over there, knocking on his door, introducing myself, asking in a casual, neighborly way if everything was okay. But what would I say? "Hi, I've been watching you through your window at night, and I was wondering why you're writing on your walls." That would go over well. Instead, I spent the day trying to convince myself it was nothing. I went to the grocery store, bought food I didn't want to eat. I called my sister, listened to her talk about her kids for 20 minutes while I made appropriate noises. I sat on my wobbly-legged table and tried to read a book, but I kept reading the same paragraph over and over without absorbing a word. When night came, I told myself I wouldn't look. I'd take a sleeping pill, pull my curtains tight, and let the man do whatever strange thing he was doing without an audience. But of course, I looked. 2:31 a.m. He was there again, in the exact same spot, doing the exact same thing, writing numbers on the wall with that same mechanical precision. I grabbed the binoculars before I could talk myself out of it. This time, I could see the numbers more clearly. They were written in neat rows, evenly spaced. They looked like dates. I squinted, adjusting the focus, trying to make them out. 10:15, 10:22, 10:28, 11:1. My breath caught. Those were recent dates, very recent. The last one was 2 days ago. And he was writing another one now. His hand moved across the wall. 11:4. Tomorrow. He was writing tomorrow's date. A chill ran down my spine. I lowered the binoculars, suddenly feeling foolish and paranoid. So what if he was writing dates? Maybe he was planning something, a project, a deadline.
People write things on their walls all the time. To-do lists, reminders, motivational quotes. But then why did it feel so wrong? I spent the next day on edge, jumping at every sound. I kept checking news sites, scrolling through local headlines, looking for what? I didn't even know. Accidents, missing persons, something that would explain the dates. I found nothing. By Friday night, I'd convinced myself I was losing it. The stress of the move, the divorce, the job I'd quit because I couldn't handle going into the office anymore. It was all catching up with me. I was seeing patterns where there were none, finding sinister meaning in innocent actions. I took 2 sleeping pills and went to bed early. I didn't look out the window. I didn't think about the man in 4B or his wall of numbers. I didn't think about the date he'd written, 11/4.
Saturday, November 4th. The sirens woke me at 6:47 a.m. I stumbled to the window, groggy and disoriented, my head fuzzy from the sleeping pills. 3 police cars were parked on the street below, their lights painting the buildings in alternating flashes of red and blue. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk, people in bathrobes and slippers, craning their necks to see. I grabbed my phone and checked the local news site. The headline loaded slowly. Body found in River Park. Police investigating suspicious death. My hands started shaking. River Park was 3 blocks away. 3 blocks. I scrolled through the article, my eyes catching on fragments of sentences. Male victim, discovered by morning jogger. Foul play suspected. Identity withheld pending notification of family. 11/4. He'd written 11/4, and someone had died. I stood at the window for a long time, watching the police cars, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. This was a coincidence. It had to be. People died every day in a city this size. There was no way the man across the alley could have known, no rational way. But I couldn't shake the memory of those other dates. 10/15, 10/22, 10/28, 11/1. I opened my laptop and started searching. Local obituaries, news archives, police reports. It took me hours, but I found them, all of them. October 15th, Martha Chen, 67, found dead in her apartment from an apparent heart attack. October 22nd, David Rodriguez, 41, car accident on the interstate. October 28th, Sarah Mitchell, 29, overdose in a downtown hotel room. November 1st, Thomas Wright, 55, stroke at his office. Different causes, different locations, different ages. Nothing obviously connecting them except the dates. The dates the man in 4B had written on his wall. I felt sick. This wasn't possible. It couldn't be possible. But there they were, the deaths matching the numbers, each one falling on the exact day he'd marked. I needed to tell someone, the police maybe, but what would I say? That my neighbor was writing dates on his wall and people were dying? They'd think I was insane. Hell, maybe I was insane. Maybe I was having some kind of breakdown, seeing connections that didn't exist, making up elaborate conspiracies to explain away random tragedies. But I knew what I'd seen. I knew those numbers were real.
I waited until nightfall. I waited until 2:15 a.m. when I knew he'd be there, standing at his wall, writing his terrible prophecies. And he was. I watched through the binoculars as he raised his hand and began to write again, a new number, a new date, 117, 3 days from now.
My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the binoculars steady. I had to do something. I couldn't just stand here and watch while he, predicted another death? Caused another death? I didn't understand how it worked, didn't understand what he was or what he was doing, but I couldn't let it happen again. Before I could talk myself out of it, I grabbed my keys and left my apartment. The hallway was dark and quiet, my footsteps echoing off the walls. I took the stairs down to the ground floor, crossed the street, and entered his building through the main door, which someone had propped open with a brick. The elevator was broken, so I climbed the stairs to the 4th floor. The hallway smelled like old cooking oil and mildew. I found 4B and stood outside the door, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might be sick. I raised my hand to knock, and I stopped. What was I doing? What if I was wrong about all of this? What if he was just some eccentric guy with a numbers obsession, and I was about to accuse him of what exactly? Murder? Witchcraft? I sounded insane even to myself. But 11/7, someone was going to die on 11/7 if I didn't do something. I knocked, 3 sharp raps that seemed to echo down the empty hallway. Silence. I knocked again, harder this time. "Hello? I'm from across the street. I just wanted to—" The door swung open before I could finish. No one was there. I stared into the apartment, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The door had opened, but there was no one standing behind it. The room beyond was dark, lit only by that same dim lamp I'd seen from my window. "Hello?" My voice came out as barely a whisper. No response. I should have left. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn around and run back to my apartment and lock the door and never think about this again. But I could see the wall from where I was standing. The wall with the numbers. I stepped inside. The apartment was cold, unnaturally cold, like someone had left all the windows open in the middle of winter. My breath misted in front of me as I moved deeper into the room, my eyes adjusting to the dim light. The wall was covered in numbers, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, written in neat, precise rows that covered every inch of the available space. Dates, all of them, going back months, maybe years, some in marker, some in pencil, some scratched directly into the plaster. I moved closer, running my eyes over the endless columns of numbers. 317, 522, 89, 914, on and on, a calendar of death stretching back into the past. And at the bottom, in fresh ink, 11/7. I reached out to touch it, my fingers trembling. The ink was still wet, smearing slightly under my touch. "Who are you?" I whispered to the empty room. "What are you?" A sound behind me made me spin around. A door was closed. I hadn't heard it close, but it was shut now, cutting off the light from the hallway. "Hello?" My voice was stronger now, angry rather than afraid. "I know you're here. I've seen you. Every night, standing here, writing your predictions or whatever they are. I know what you're doing." Silence.
fumbled for my phone, turned on the flashlight. The beam swept across the room, illuminating details I hadn't been able to see from my window. There was no furniture, no bed, no couch, no table, just bare floors covered in a thick layer of dust, the kind of dust that accumulates over years, not weeks. Nobody lived here. Nobody had lived here for a long time. But I'd seen him. I'd watched him standing right here, night after night, writing on this wall. I moved through the apartment, my phone light revealing more emptiness, more dust, more impossible absence. The bathroom sink was dry and stained. The kitchen cabinets were empty, except for ancient mouse droppings. The bedroom had nothing in it at all, just four walls and a grimy window.
This place had been abandoned for months at least, maybe years. I returned to the living room, to the wall of numbers. They were real. The ink was fresh. Someone had written 11/7 tonight. But there was no one here. There had never been anyone here. I ran. I don't remember opening the door or running down the stairs or crossing the street back to my building. I just remember suddenly being in my apartment, door locked, curtains drawn, sitting on my sagging sofa with my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. I didn't sleep that night, or the next night, or the night after that. Tuesday, November 7th. The police found my body in the river at dawn. Apparent suicide, they said. A tragic case. The landlord mentioned I'd seemed unstable, depressed. The divorce had been hard on me. They found my note on the kitchen table. I don't remember writing it, but there it is in the police report, in my handwriting. I can't do this anymore. Nobody mentions the binoculars still sitting on the windowsill, still focused on the empty apartment across the alley. Nobody mentions the fresh ink on my hands, the marker I must have been holding, though I can't remember buying one. Nobody notices that the date on my note is wrong. It says 11/7, but I wrote it on November 3rd. I'm sure I did. I'm standing at my window now, looking across at my old apartment. There's someone new living there, a young woman, maybe 30, 35. She moved in yesterday. She's standing at her window right now, looking at me. I can see the binoculars in her hands. I raise my hand to the wall behind me and begin to write. I've been writing for a long time now. There are so many dates, so many names I'll never know. And I still don't sleep. I don't think I ever will again.
More horror awaits. Subscribe.